Counselling for Toads, A Psychological Adventure, by Robert DeBoard, read by Julian Franklin. Mole finds Toad in a poorly state. The weather was changing on the riverbank. There was something ominous in the air that had not been there before. Black thunderclouds hung menacingly over the fields. A few birds flitted pointlessly among the hedgerows, singing a song, the notes of which they seemed scarcely to remember. Even the ducks, who had as usual been quarrelling and quacking about supposed snubs and alleged insults, nestled into the reeds and chose to ignore all but the most outrageous attacks. Only the river moved on, black and sinuous, always changing yet always the same, creating a boundary for some animals, a highway for others, and with a suppressed energy and power that was only dangerous when ignored. In this oppressive weather, Mole decided to go out. If he were to be honest, he was getting a bit restless, if not fed up, living with Rat. Yet even as he thought this, he felt guilty, for had not Ratty befriended Mole, taken him from his dull old house and introduced him to all his jolly friends? And what friends they were too, and what adventures they had had! Boating on the river, meeting Badger, caravanning with Toad, and finally playing a heroic part in the rescue of Toad Hall from the wild wooders. And yet, Mole found it hard to describe exactly how he was feeling, but it was something to do with his very self. In fact, that was it. He felt that he was rarely able to be himself, because he was always standing in Rat's shadow. If they went boating, Rat would usually tell him that he was not doing it right, like not feathering his oars properly. When they moored, Rat would check the painter to see that Mole had secured it properly, and invariably gave it another turn around the post. If they got lost, Rat always knew the way, just as he had done when he rescued Mole in a snowstorm in the wild wood. Or that time when, on a long walk, they chanced upon Mole's old house, and, not unnaturally, Mole was overcome with emotion. Not so the ever-capable Rat, who took over, got the fieldmice to buy food and drink, and organised a splendid evening. The trouble was that Rat did seem more capable than he was. He could scull better, he knew more knots and bends, he could even do a square lashing. And he really did take care of Mole. But in spite of this friendship and kindness, Mole felt dissatisfied. He wished that Rat wasn't quite so capable, and that he would let Mole try out things his own way, even if that meant getting it wrong. Of course, this had happened. Like the first time he was in Rat's boat and grabbed the oars, and inevitably tipped the boat over. Rat had rescued him with great good humour, and yet Mole thought, "If I hear Rat tell that story at dinner ever again, I shall scream." Mole was thinking these thoughts as he put on his raincoat and sou'wester. He said to Rat, "I think I'll just pop over for a chat with Toad. We haven't seen him for ages, and the walk will do me good." The Rat, who was murmuring poetry things to himself and was trying to find a rhyme for effervescent, scarcely looked up, but as Mole was going out of the door, suddenly shouted, "Be careful, Moley! Think of what happened last time you went out on your own." He was, of course, referring to the time when Mole got lost in the wild wood, and Rat had saved him. Mole was furious and called Rat several unflattering words under his breath. Out loud he said, "Thank you, Ratty, I'll take care," adding sotto voce, "You stupid squint-eyed rodent," which Rat did not hear, and which he was not meant to. But it made Mole feel better. It was in this frame of mind that Mole walked over to Toad Hall, scarcely responding to the polite greetings of the rabbits he met on the way. He knew that he had gained their respect since arriving at the river-bank, and no one would demand any toll from him, as they once had done. Let them dare. And yet, did he only imagine that he heard one say in a rather horrid way, "That's strange. You don't often see Mole on his own." In this rather miserable frame of mind, he found himself walking up the drive to Toad Hall. Toad Hall was impressive. There were no two ways about it. It had recently been described in a glossy county magazine as a gentleman's residence benefiting from a secluded position on the bank of the river, enjoying expansive views across the wild wood and beyond. All this is surrounded by extensive and mature gardens, with outlying paddocks and other buildings. No wonder Toad was so proud of it. But as Mole walked up the long drive, he was shocked to see how everything seemed run down. The hedges were untrimmed, and the rose beds were full of weeds. The lawns were covered in leaves, and the whole place looked unkempt and uncared for. Even the hall itself looked grim and forbidding. The white paint, which used to sparkle in the sun, was dull and flaking. The creepers and creeping roses, which brought such colour and vibrancy to the walls, were dying and hanging down like black ropes. The windows, always clear and shiny, seemed only to reflect the dark and brooding weather, and added to the atmosphere of grim foreboding. Mole shivered. Pressing the buzzer, he heard the bell ringing deep within the house. There was no answer, and so he pressed a second time. Again the bell rang loudly, but to no avail. "Oh, well," thought Mole, "I might have guessed that Toad would be out enjoying himself. He's probably at his club playing billiards." This was a game at which Toad was particularly adept. Reluctant to leave, Mole walked around the house, past the walled kitchen garden, and came to the back door. He looked through the kitchen window to see what might be there. The room was empty, although there was some evidence that the stove was alight. He knew this room well, for it was furnished with comfortable old chairs in which he and Toad had sat and enjoyed many a hot mug of coffee on a winter's day. And then he saw on a chair a large heap of old clothes. Suddenly the clothes started to move. Mole, being a timid creature, was about to run off into the garden when the clothes fell away to reveal Toad. Mole tugged at the back door and was surprised to find that it opened. Inside was the saddest Toad he had ever seen. Toad's eyes, always large, were now hooded and dull. His cricket sweater, which he invariably wore around the house, was covered in food stains, and his +4s, usually immaculate and worn at just the right length, had the appearance of a couple of potato sacks hanging from his waist. "Hello," said Toad. "Sorry about the mess, but I'm not feeling too bright at the moment." And with that he burst into tears.